It is the stories of midlife professional women who are exiting the workplace just at the point where they're about to step up into positions of influence.
Welcome to a brand new episode of Starts at the Top, our podcast about leading differently. I'm Paul Thomas.
And I'm Zoe Amma. Our podcast exists to help leaders and their teams understand what they need to do differently today to prepare for the world of tomorrow. We started Starts at the Top as a podcast about digital disruption, but we soon realised that leaders were telling us about something more important and urgent, about how traditional ways of leading have changed forever.
We make it our mission to speak to leaders who are carving out new ways of leading, and we cover topics from emerging tech to inclusion, from remote work to mental health and climate change, basically all the subjects that today's leaders need to be across in 2024.
Our podcast isn't about shiny corporate case studies. It's about lessons learned and progress made the hard way, and crucially, how that can inspire others.
And on today's episode, we're sharing our conversation with Dr. Lucy Ryan, who we spoke with last December about her book, Revolting Women, Why Midlife Women Walk Out and What to Do About It.
This is the fourth episode of this season, and we would like to thank the four amazing women we've spoken to as part of this Women in Leadership mini-series. Not only Lucy, but Aggie Matuma, Lorraine Candy and Kathy Newman.
We learn so much from the conversations that we have on this podcast, and these episodes in particular have been revelatory for me. I'm not sure I would have normally picked up books on the menopause and midlife women in the workplace on my regular trips to Waterstones, but having read them and then had the privilege of exploring them with you, Zoe, and with our authors, with the authors themselves, I say we could do this again next season. I've learned a lot.
Oh, amen to that. Yes, we'd love to profile more authors, and we've got more coming up in our future interviews. Finding time for reading is so important to me too. And this week I've been fascinated by a couple of blog posts from The Honest Broker about how we can all make more time for ourselves away from our screens. This is an essay by the blog's author, Ted Goya, I hope I'm saying that right, about breaking free from what he calls dopamine culture, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes. I found this really thought-provoking, Paul, because it got me thinking about the amount of time I spend on my phone and also some of my own behaviours when I'm scrolling. You know, the other day I was scrolling through Instagram and I was thinking, I don't think I'm really enjoying this. And I was just not really feeling terribly relaxed either. And there's nothing worse than that kind of passive scrolling, is there, when you're just idly thumbing through your phone, and it's really like eating junk food, which may come as a surprise to people, given that I am quite a big advocate for social media. But I do also think that we need to be very mindful of our behaviours when we're consuming content as well. And if you're not enjoying something in that moment, then that tells you something about the relationship with the channel, but also what you may need to do differently as well. What did you think of that blog?
Yeah, no, I think starting off, just to echo your thoughts, I mean, somebody that in the past has been a very big advocate of social media, and I find myself moving away from it more and more. And I think one of the stock phrases we use in this house, seemingly more and more, is that the world is filled with this sort of low-level anxiety, sort of fueled by different areas of our lives. And one of those areas is social media. And I found, particularly over the last couple of years, a real sense of low-level anxiety every time I go in there and sort of look at what everybody else is doing, particularly around my business. Now, around work, I'm always busy. We've always got stuff to do, and we're always, saying we're doing pretty well. And then you go onto social media and you just see this whole story of other people seemingly doing these wonderful things, but it's only when you have the face-to-face conversations with them there, and they say, do you know what, it's not that great actually, I'm putting on a brave face. And I think some of that is what we see being fed through the screens to us through social media. But it is that endless, I think he talks about this in the essay quite a lot, the sort of the endless scroll. And I was quite taken with what he says. We label this scrolling doom scrolling. It's it's there in the title. It's not a great thing for us to be doing. We spend too much time doing it, and we sort of find ourselves doing it at the weirdest times. I liked the examples in the essay of people writing in and saying, just been to the cinema and sat through 3 hours of June 2, for June Part 2, and people in front of me were using their phones and scrolling through. I know it's hard to sometimes get through even watching an hour-long program on the sofa without picking up your phone and being distracted by a buzz or a feed. So yeah, it seeps into everything, doesn't it?
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. I think that's part of the challenge, isn't it? And like you, I have absolutely championed social media over the years, and it is still a channel which I think is really important for organisations, especially charities, where they don't have a huge budget to spend on other forms of marketing. I guess this here is about that personal use of social, isn't it? And where we might find ourselves constantly reaching for our phones, or perhaps looking at our phones when we should be talking to our children. I mean, goodness me, I've certainly been there. But yeah, it's really got me thinking about how dependent I've become on my phone, and how I need to perhaps have a little bit of a break from it sometimes.
And am I right in saying, did you tell me once upon a time that you turned off notifications, or do you still have them on the phone?
It's a good question. So the only notifications I have on my phone now are I have Slack notifications, because obviously we have a Zoe Emma Digital Slack channel, which you are part of. And then also I have calendar notifications, and I have my WhatsApp notifications because I'm in a number of groups, to do with like kids' schools and things like that. But everything else, text, email, other alerts, I turned all of those off, and also social alerts, I turned all of those off years ago, because I just find it's too distracting. It's so many notifications, even with just those simple things. What about you?
Yeah, every time this comes up, I think I need to turn them off. I still get them for quite a lot of things, but I tend to try and set up specific alerts for specific topics that I really am interested in, so that hopefully cuts through. WhatsApp, for example, it's quite easy to turn off the notifications there for groups. So group text, which can go, as well as I do, can go absolutely off, can't they? So that, I try to stay away from. So I think notifications is one thing. The other thing that I would say here is that even though phones are quite dominant in our lives, I was quite pleased. I will put this into the show notes, but there was a table that he put together in this called the Rise of Dopamine Culture, where he talked about various different activities, and there's a range from slow traditional culture all the way through to dopamine. So, for example, the one that stood out to me was music. I'm very much an album person, and that's on the slow traditional culture. Then it goes albums, tracks, TikToks as being the sort of the main one. And now it's looking at this one, play a sport, watch a sport, gamble on a sport. So there are these different things. I think in most instances, I am still very much on the left-hand side of that. So although I'm geared towards my phone more often than I probably should be, it's quite nice to look at that table and think, do you know what, in some areas, I feel quite old school.
Amazing.
Although I can't remember the last time I've ever written a handwritten letter. That is a long time ago. My handwriting has just gone off the charts bad, because I'm never using a pen.
Amazing. Well, I think this article's well worth reading, and will give everyone a lot of food for thought about being very dependent on phones, but also on the sort of dopamine hit that we've all been known to get from social media. And also for anyone who is trying to spend less time on their phone, I've signed up to a free Guardian course. It's just based on a series of newsletters, which is all about getting you to spend less time on your phone. So we'll link to that in the show notes as well.
So now for our conversation with Dr. Lucy Ryan.
We are super excited to welcome Dr. Lucy Ryan to Starts at the Top. Lucy is Managing Director of Mindspring International, which she has led for the last 20 years. And during that time, she has trained, consulted with, and coached over 10,000 leaders in global blue chip companies across 29 countries. In 2021, Lucy published the best-selling Lunchtime Learning for Leaders, synthesising her popular, down-to-earth training approach. She is also a passionate advocate for women's professional development, helping organisations attract, retain and promote their female leaders and gender-proof their succession plans. Noticing a trend for female midlife clients leaving their corporate roles, she led a unique 5-year doctoral research project exploring this phenomenon, filling a long-standing data gap. Lucy's 2023 book, Revolting Women, Why Midlife Women Walk Out and What to Do About It, was an instant Amazon bestseller, Financial Times Book of the Month, and hailed by the Sunday Times as clear, pithy and enraging. Lucy is an accredited master practitioner coach and nominated in 2022 as one of the top 100 global coaches for women. She is a much requested speaker on the conference circuit and a popular webinar and podcast guest. With a master's in positive psychology, Lucy lectures in positive leadership and organisational wellbeing at the University of East London, and she is an honorary research fellow at the University of Liverpool. Dr. Lucy Ryan, we're so excited to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you, Zoe.
And we're even more excited because just before we started recording, I shared with you the story about how I came across the book. I am in my mid-40s. I am in that crunch point of looking after children transitioning to secondary school and running a business and thinking about care of an elderly parent. And when I opened the Sunday Times that morning and read about Revolting Women, I thought, I need to read this book. It is going to change my life. And I thought about that again last week when I was icing my daughter's 11th birthday cake whilst frantically trying to get ready for a board meeting. And the dilemmas you describe in this book really, really hit home with me. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me, Zoe. I've been looking forward to this.
It's our pleasure. We're very happy to have you here. So for anyone who hasn't come across the book, can you tell us a bit about what it's about and also what prompted you to write it?
So what prompted me is I'd done my PhD in this area. So I've done a PhD looking at how midlife women experience their professional life. And I thought that was the end of it. After 5 years, you always want to throw your PhD in the bin and never talk about it again. But it wouldn't let me go. And I wrote another book in the meantime, Lunchtime Learning, and thought, that's it. I'm not doing this anymore. But it absolutely wouldn't let me go. And so I ended up writing Revolting Women. And essentially, it is the story or stories of midlife professional women who are exiting the workplace just at the point where they're about to step up into positions of influence. And it's an extraordinary phenomenon. And I still can't believe that it's not written about everywhere, that there's not complete outrage, because it's quite a global phenomenon. It's not just UK. But the fact is, it's like a silent revolution in that they are just exiting and everyone's put their head down, ignored it, and hope the problem will go away. So this was my starter for 10 of writing the book to start the conversation about what do we do about the exodus of these women.
That's amazing. And can you tell us about the kind of scale of the problem? Because I remember being really struck when I first read the book a couple of months ago by these really shocking stats and the size of the challenge as well. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. Well, let me start off with just two big facts to give you a sense of the scale of it. From the US and UK, for every female director that's being promoted, 2 are leaving. And in the UK, for example, we have had a plateauing figure of between 11 and 14% of female employed directors, executive directors. Now, that's been a plateau that's been nearly a decade and has been reported on relentlessly, year in, year out by Cranfield, and hasn't moved. And it's been hidden by the fact that we have a lot of non-executive directors, female non-executive directors at the top of our companies. So everyone's gone, not a problem. We got a lot of middle-aged women, thanks very much. But the fact is they're not employed. And the actual employed female directors are exiting. Hence this plateauing statistic that is just not shifting. So the scale is, it's big, it's worldwide, and we have no single organisation at all, any sector, where the female directors are greater than the male directors.
This is shocking, isn't it? So why aren't more people talking about this? Because they should be, shouldn't they?
Well, that's why I wrote the book. Why aren't people talking about it? If I was being cynical, which I'm actually not often, I don't really like cynicism, to be honest, Zoe. The reason we're not talking about it is either because it is just more convenient to leave the status quo as it is. So we've got a lot of men leading our organisations. If they really have to embrace this issue, then something rather major has to shift. So either the desire to keep the status quo is just too big, or the problem has crept up on everyone.
And do you think ageism and sexism are at play here?
I think gendered ageism is a huge problem. And it's one of the things that I start with in the book. Why are women exiting? Well, one of the first reasons they're exiting is because of gendered ageism. And that takes many forms, Zoe. It can be blunt. It can be language. You know, the women I interviewed were called all sorts of things, from old bint to fuddy-duddy to old aunt to all sorts of things. So it can be actual blunt language, or it can be much more subtle. A lot of women found that they were just being sidelined, and that projects they were leading, they were suddenly told that maybe they weren't capable of leading and they were giving it to a man. So they were sidelined, they were moved down, they were moved across, or they were told they're just not capable of stepping up, but a man is with less qualifications. So you've got all sorts of things at play. Plus, we can't ignore the fact that an aging man is considered far sexier than an aging woman. So I can see Paul raising his eyebrows. You know, I call it the George Clooney effect. You know, that there are plenty of positive words to discuss older men. You know, so older men might be called fine wines or silver foxes, or they're considered quite cool as they become older and grey-haired. Older grey-haired women, there is not a single positive word in the English language to describe them. We have plenty of negative ones: hags, crones, spinsters, winches, harridans, frumps, but not a single positive word to describe them.
That's so interesting, because obviously I was very aware of this gendered ageism issue, but I haven't really thought about that point about language before. You're right. The female George Clooney is out there, right? I mean, we just have to hero them and have words to describe them.
Yeah. And we go, wow, you look good getting older. What we say to women is, oh, wow, you don't look your age. So we ask them to be younger. There are all sorts of aspects around gendered ageism that women face. And certainly the women I interviewed expended a lot of energy, money and time trying to look younger.
Is it worse in certain industries, or do you think this is across the board? Is it all organisations, or is it worse in I mean, there are male-dominated industries. Most industries will have male domination at the top of them, I guess. Silly comment to make, but is it worse somewhere?
It's more obvious, Paul, in industries like the media, in that branding, looking young, looking fast, looking speedy is more important in some industries like media. But I interviewed women across all sectors deliberately and found no difference. The only sector I couldn't interview women was politics. And I think that's another sector, Paul, where it's hard to look older as well.
Yeah, and I was going to say I listen to a lot of, I watch a lot of movies and listen to a lot of film podcasts, and that's an industry that's constantly sort of criticised for, well, the roles dry up for older women, and isn't that a perfect role for a woman of her age, and all these sorts of things. But you're right, even in that industry, it's never massively positive, and the roles for older women are usually sort of powerhouses, are sort of
it's exactly
women
right.
on the rise, all of that sort of stuff, comebacks, and that sort of language is used.
Yeah, yes, is exactly right. And we can name most of the older women on screen. We know our Helen Mirrens, our Judi Dench's, our Maggie Smiths. We couldn't start to name older men on screen because there's so many. So they are the exception.
That's very true. And it was interesting. I was listening to you on another podcast over the weekend, which Paul sent me. And also there's a thing of older women of colour, isn't there? So and Just Like That series, which sounds like you've watched as well. I remember being absolutely riveted by the cast, and one of the reasons why I suddenly realised you don't often see older women of colour on screen. So in that regard, it was really interesting to witness.
Massive.
That.
And for every statistic that I have in the book, as I say in the book, it's worse for women of colour. So everything is heightened for other women.
Yeah, I can well believe that. I just saw Paul staring out the window. They're probably contemplating a future as the George Clooney digital strategy.
George Clooney of podcasting, Paul?
No, I'm looking in the mirror and seeing an aging man that needs a haircut and feels a little bit out of his depth. No, I think it's massively interesting, and I think I don't want to sort of name names. I've been on this podcast for long enough, talking about the organisations that I used to work for. So I'm not going to sort of name names, but I worked under a female CEO, and just thinking back about some of the language that was used to describe her in that post, lots of positive language, lots of reaffirming language, but the long and the short of it is that, so we've talked about it before, haven't we, Zoe? The antibodies kicked in. And as soon as the changes that she was making to the organisation didn't stick or didn't work, then it became a sort of let's redress the balance. Let's go back to what we know. That was a good experiment. It got us to a certain point. But it's not what we need. So, witnessed it firsthand within organisations that I've worked for. That's kind of my reflection as I was gazing out of the window and thinking, oh God, this is not a good position to be in. And as I work with now smaller organisations, hopefully starting to see a bit of a turn within smaller organisations that have some more ability to manoeuvre around these big questions.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind where the change comes from, whether it comes from our large organisations, our small organisations. But for sure, a lot of the midlife women are leaving large organisations and setting up smaller organisations. They're not going, they're not retiring. They are the entrepreneurs of the future. I think I'm right in saying that 67% of all new business accounts set up last year were by women over 55.
We've also interviewed on this podcast, remember Joy from Tech Pixies, and Tech Pixies was an organisation that was specifically set up to help women who wanted to exit the workplace and take up careers in other areas. So this was specifically around managing digital transformation, social media strategies, that sort of thing. And on her books, she had lawyers, she had doctors, she had women
Amazing.
from all sorts of industries who were signing up and saying, I don't want to do that anymore. I want something more flexible, something that I can do in my own time. And she had a massive influx of women into that program.
Yeah. So on the one hand, there's something very positive about this, which is women are leaving, middle-aged women are leaving organisations. They're taking their wisdom, their creativity into entrepreneurial companies. But what about the loss to all the companies who are losing them? So on the one hand, we celebrate what the women are doing. And on the other hand, I'm going, why didn't you keep them?
Absolutely. And tell us more about the impact of that loss, because that's something that really struck me when reading your book.
Well, I think you're absolutely right in that there is a huge impact. And I think that once the women leave, you lose a huge amount, Zoe. Let's talk about the organisations first. You lose a whole wealth of talent, often homegrown talent within the organisation. You lose creativity. Now, it's quite interesting to me that we think that young people have the hold on ambition, creativity, and energy. Now, I would say look at any middle-aged woman and I will show you an extremely resilient, wise, creative, motivated woman. So they lose an enormous amount. You know, I know from all the research that middle-aged women are, after a kind of zigzag career, are definitely on the up in terms of motivation at kind of 55 or so. They want more of it, not less. So not only are we losing all of that, but the other thing we're losing that really matters is organisations are losing their older role models. So young people have no one to look up to. And they're going, okay, so I'm not going to get old with this company because there aren't really any good positive role models. And there isn't any training for me or any pathways for me or creative pathways for me. So it's an enormous challenge for organisations. For women, it's either a positive move because they go, right, I'm off, and they've got all this exciting ideas for companies of their own. But very commonly that comes after transition. And it's what I call the midlife collision, in that one of the biggest reasons that midlife women leave organisations is this a collision of circumstances that is utterly painful. So not only is it often the looking after of our older children, which isn't necessarily painful, although there is a growing number of older children with mental health challenges. But there's also the looking after our parents, with sadly high levels of dementia care going on. Plus, you'll often find middle-aged women are looking after a family member, a sibling, a husband, and then they've also got the menopause and often either financial issues, divorce. So there is this sweet spot, this collision that goes on at midlife. And what happens is they often want a temporary break. I heard so many heartbreaking stories of women going, I just wanted 5 weeks to be with my dad when he died. I just wanted some temporary time and I couldn't get it. So I left. And I think what organisations don't get is that commonly all these midlife challenges are temporary. And so the challenge on women, it might be positive afterwards, but there is a huge amount of either anger or pain or hurt as they cope with this midlife collision. And then they get back on their feet and then they're ready to start again.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just awful, isn't it? That the cost to organisations of losing these incredibly talented members of the workforce in terms of their skills, as you say, their energy, the value of them being role models, especially with recruitment being such an expensive thing to do, is huge. And then there's also the cost to individuals, isn't there? So if someone has a really difficult exit, then that can really affect their confidence. And obviously, as you say, hopefully on the other side of that, that person then discovers their entrepreneurial nous and goes on to do wonderful, wonderful things.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
It doesn't need to be this painful round, does it? And the onus is very much on organisations to fix and change this.
I think so. I mean, we can put some of the onus on women to articulate what's going on, but I think that we've spent many years, decades, blaming women, particularly saying you need more confidence, you need to step up, you need to do this. But actually, it's the organisation that needs to recognise this challenge. But that starts from a strategic intent to want to retain them.
And you're talking about fairly short, in some instances, where women you've spoken to have asked for 5 weeks.
Yeah.
Are there any organisations that are seriously looking at those midlife sabbaticals? Because I've worked with organisations that take it very seriously for their young up-and-coming talent. Oh, you would like a sabbatical? Yeah, here you go. Here's some time off. But surely that should be in place for women going through this as well.
There are few organisations that are taking it seriously. I mean, a handful, Paul. But there are more that are starting to look at it. And you're absolutely right that that's what's needed, which is there's something around a midlife sabbatical. Now, it's not as radical as it sounds either.
No.
Hey, we've got 100-year lives, we've got 50-year careers. We're used to doing it for maternity leave, we're used to doing it for young people. But because we've come to think of kind of 55 as the glide to retirement, we've stopped thinking creatively around maybe a 6-month sabbatical to sort all of these different things out in your life and then get you ready for this next, whatever the next career pathway is.
This is about reframing, isn't it? Because what I loved about your book was this sense of midlife being this time when actually it can be the start of a really exciting new chapter. So one of the people who always pops into my head with this stuff is Trinny Woodall, who I think investment for her business, for her new business of age, 57 or something like that. And she's living her best life in this amazing new chapter on this adventure. And more organisations need to see women at this time in their life as people who can go on to this source of kind of growth and this new journey, which can actually deliver a lot for society, a lot for them, and make a massive difference.
Absolutely. And that's the revolt. If we talk about why women leave, we've got gendered ageism, we've got the midlife collision, but we've got this much more hopeful side, which is a revolt against the kind of full-time foolishness of the system, and that a desire to live a career and live a life on their terms. So they're wanting to redefine what career success looks like. And it's certainly not 24/7. But it is hopeful and interesting and motivating.
It really is. And what time is this revolt? And when do I need to be there? And do I need to bring snacks?
Do you need to bring snacks?
Yeah. It's at 5 p.m, Zoe, and you need to definitely bring gin and snacks.
Gin and snacks, I like that. Well, Paul knows I love to bake, so I'll bring some cake. And you'll join us as well, won't you, Paul?
Bring the gin, and a bottle of whiskey. And so, as I said, as Zoe said, we were sort of sharing various episodes of podcasts you'd been on over the last couple of months. And one of the things that you talked about in that, I think, connects to what we've just been discussing and the concept of midlife check-ins. And organisations doing that, and I guess quite sadly to sort of really bring that to life, what they're going to need to do for most organisations is make that across the board for men and women going through midlife.
Yes.
And I was really interested in that concept because working on my own, I could do with a bit of that. So I probably need to sort out my own midlife check-in. But
Yeah.
how do you see that working within organisations?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And it's the part, Paul, that organizations are kind of grabbing onto, which is, okay, midlife check-ins, we can do that. What I mean by it is when managers have a conversation with members of their team, it's usually about task. How are you doing? What's going on? What have you done well this year? What's not going well? What are your objectives for next year? What we rarely do, although we started in the pandemic, is we rarely go, and how are you? And what actually is going on in your life in a holistic way. Tell me about your kids, tell me about your parents, tell me what else you're juggling, what actually is going on, and how can we support you? And if more conversations, I mean, women have conversations like that with me as their coach, but they're not having it with their organisation because they say, well, if I tell them what's going on, I'll suddenly be sidelined. So it's about having a healthy, holistic check-in, but it must have some form of solution attached to it. It's not, it can't just be, look, I'm really curious, what is going on? And I'm so sorry. Anyway, could you get back to work, please? There needs to be on the other side something that goes with it. But if we had those conversations, we'd have far less surprises. And I know organisations being consistently surprised by top executives suddenly resigning. And they're going, well, we had you in the succession plan and you're going. Yeah, but if you'd found out what was going on, that wouldn't be a surprise.
And do you think that the leaving is exacerbated or has been exacerbated by the pandemic? Is there we've talked on this podcast quite often about a general sense of reevaluation, tiredness, people realizing, that they were barking up the wrong tree and had been for a long, long time. Do you think that's changed things at all?
I think it's changed things in a couple of ways. One is exactly as you say, the reevaluation. There's no doubt about it. There was a sense of a kind of revolt of the life I was leading and how I want it to be. So that's true. On the more difficult side, once women came back into the household, everyone went, oh, it's really nice to have you home. And it's been far harder for them to leave again and go back out to the workplace. And unfortunately, what I'm seeing in a lot of workplaces is they want everyone back in full time. So I thought we were going to be able to really manage a hybrid workforce that would suit women more. But I'm seeing a cry for more full-time work back in the office. I might be wrong.
I think you're right about that. I'm thinking of one friend in particular, and I want to be careful what I say about them because I think she does listen sometimes. A phenomenally talented senior leader who works in the corporate world, who, like me, is at a stage where she's got kids who are either about to transition to secondary or in secondary, where I didn't realise you need to be at home a bit more because they're coming back from school earlier. Paul's nodding because he's got kids, so it's similar age to mine. You just need to be around that bit more, don't you?
Yep.
And actually, that's had a bit of a knock-on impact on jobs that this person who could go for, who would be an asset to any organisation, and also balancing that with her husband's career, who travels a lot. And I think you're right. So I think it's that thing of being pulled back into the whirlpool of being at home and having to deal with a lot of the commitments there and balance that alongside a very full-on job is a real challenge, isn't it?
It's a real challenge and quite, again, an unspoken one in that when our children, I certainly found when my children were younger, there was a lot of quid pro quo. Will you take mine? I'll take yours. You do that. And I found that as my children went to secondary school, they didn't really want to see me or speak to me, but they wanted to know I was there.
That sums up parenting at this age beautifully. Yeah. Thank you, Lucy.
And, those challenges become different at any age.
Yeah, and I think things like, checking homework's being done and all those sorts of things are the challenges that when they walk through the door you have to face. As you recognised earlier on, I think a huge uplift in emotional issues as well.
It is.
So being there for that, especially going through either the transition into senior school or through senior school, can be quite hard. Exam times, all those sorts of things, and I keep coming back to the idea that it would be so simple to allow that sabbatical, that sort of midlife pause where you can just say, look, just a few weeks, just so I can readjust, get myself together, and then come back with that renewed vigor and energy to really, really go into the next phase of my career with a spring in my step and purpose.
Agree. And I think that when organisations get used to this idea, and it's a when to me, not an if, of both the 100-year life, the 50-year career, the loss of their older women, then they will start going, we really need to think about this differently in terms of flexibility, sabbaticals, check-ins, giving women a way back in, I think is really important too.
And that's so interesting, isn't it? Because I think one of the things you talk about in the book is how actually that way back in post baby has been thought about by organisations, and there's a lot of transferable learning. I mean, obviously the life situation is different, but if it can be done for younger women coming back after having children, there's surely a way to do it for these incredibly talented midlife women.
Absolutely. We're not dumb in organisations. We've done it very well for maternity. In the UK, we haven't done it very well for paternity, but Scandinavia has been perfect role models for us. I will come back to the fact there needs to be a strategic intent to tackle this issue. Once you've got that strategic intent, I believe the solutions are staring us in the face and not too hard.
I think that's a great point. So with that strategic intent and thinking about some of those great progressive examples from Scandinavia, do you think that's what it takes? You need some kind of signalling, some sort of policy commitment at that governmental level for things to shift? Do we need that rather than organisations fixing this on their own?
I think if you had it to government level, that would be great. But governments change and change their policies and reduce funding. I think it will take it from a cabal of CEOs, which is what's starting to happen in France. It is really interesting. And so I think it will come from a group of CEOs going, right, we actually need to address this and we need to think about this differently. And then gradually, I think we'll start to see those wheels turn.
So if I'm a leader listening to this podcast thinking, right, I need to read this book and I need to do things differently, I didn't realise about the scale of the problem, what should I be doing?
Mm-hmm. So apart from obviously reading the book, Zoe,
that is important,
and taking it back to the organisation, what I would do is take the issues, and I've put kind of 10 provocations for change at the back of the book. So I've laid out some steps that an organisation can take. So I think any leader needs to take it to HR, needs to take it to their diversity and inclusion people, and needs to start looking at their own statistics of their own team, their own organisation, and thinking about what are we like? Where are we losing women? What are our personal statistics? And then bringing it up at the senior leadership team meetings and seeing what the appetite is for change and slowly but surely building it.
Yeah, and I thoroughly recommend those 10 provocations. I think that there's so much good practical advice in there for leaders who know that this is important, but need those tips and those steps that they can follow in order to take this forward. So yeah, I absolutely love those. I think that's a really great, it's like a toolkit almost to get people started with.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to start somewhere, and I'd start with looking at your own statistics of an organisation.
And before we started recording today, you talked about how you had this amazing supportive response from lots of women, and I can see that all over social, which is great.
Yes.
And we talked about the response from organisations being a bit different. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So, as you rightly say, middle-aged women have been beating a path to my door, saying, thank you for recognising us, thank you for speaking about this. This is the first time I've seen my life, my experiences in print. Organisations have been slower to do that, slower to the point of silence. And that's changing. It's only been 3 months, so that is slowly starting to change. I think naively, I thought, Zoe, that my phone would ring off the hook with CEOs going, right, help us do this, and that's not the case. So systemic changes will happen slowly, and I am slightly less naive now, 3 months on, and I can see that I've just got to tackle this slightly differently and start at the top with CEOs and help them see that both age is an issue as well as their gender-proofing their succession plans.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think it will take time for the wheel to turn inevitably.
Yes.
It does in any area of change around EDI, doesn't it? And
yes,
and I feel that this whole issue around age is one of those things that has been perhaps quite overlooked in some EDI programs as well. So it's great that you're starting this conversation, and it might just take one horrible news story, to create that burning platform. Something awful happens in some organization, and then suddenly CEOs start to mobilize en masse. We can't have this happen here. So maybe that's what it will take, unfortunately. I mean, I would love it if they were all beating their path to your door now. I mean, who knows? It might happen tomorrow. But I think this change is coming. The fact that you've got this kind of momentum and energy around the launch of the book says to me that this is in the offing.
Yeah, I think so too. So, thank you for helping me on this journey.
No problem. And Paul, you had a question about midlife transition, didn't you?
Well, no, I was just thinking one of the podcasts I shared with Zoe, you talked about, they asked you what's next, and you said a long rest, which is fine. But that's good. That's good. A good answer to that question. A long rest.
I was obviously feeling very tired that day.
Yeah. But the second thing you said, and I think we should have maybe talked about this earlier on, but I think it connects with the obviously I'm a man. I'm going to bring a sort of a male perspective to this podcast quite often, and a football perspective quite often. Brilliant. With that, you said that you'd be interested in looking and researching this from a male perspective, and the more I started thinking about that question before Zoe asked me to ask it, again, I wondered whether that's a trigger point for the conversation about women, is if you were to do that piece of research about men, whether that would then trigger the conversation about women. And I hate to sort of put it in that sort of perspective, but I think in taking the conversation to men who in midlife, I mean, it's celebrated, right? We go, oh, you're having a bit of a midlife crisis. You just bought a sports car. You just left your wife for another one. All this sort of stuff that happens, we celebrate it and go, isn't that funny?
Yeah.
But actually the reverse, when you flip it over to the female side, it's completely different. Yeah. And I just wonder whether a trigger point for men, as Zoe said, men are going to need to step up and recognise this, is that they recognise it in themselves and then say, and yes, what about the women? And I just wonder whether that is going to be a trigger point for this to come to life for you.
I think it's so interesting, Paul, and I suppose the easy answer is I don't know. I think for so long, certainly since the 1950s, where the term midlife crisis came from, we have got used to joking about men's midlife. I actually think men do know that often they're struggling at midlife. But I think, A, they don't say it, and B, they frame it in terms of this ha-ha crisis by a Ferrari type language. Whereas I think women are less able to, or don't want to joke it off. So I think certainly CEOs are going to be more interested to act when the conversation is broader. So when the conversation is about age and age diversity rather than just about women.
Yeah, I think that again, Zoe's made a great point there. I'm working with an organisation at the moment who are sort of looking at their EDI strategy, and age is not in there.
Yes.
And
yeah.
straight away tomorrow morning, the recommendation is going to be, right, we need to put that in there, and it needs to be front and centre, because I think it's so important. And Zoe and I benefit from this, of course, because what we do in both of our organisations is surround ourselves with brilliant people who can work with us to do brilliant things for our clients. And in my case, those 3 brilliant people I work with are all women who have all left industry and are all looking for something different. So from my perspective, it's a sort of a winning. You leave that world, you come into mine, and that's absolutely fine. But you're right, it's what it leaves behind, and that's a real concern.
Absolutely. So, on the one hand, isn't it brilliant? And that's what I was saying is we can look at all these amazing entrepreneurial middle-aged women, creative, wise, resilient. And on the other hand, I'm going, but what a loss to an organisation. And with just a little bit of thought and intent, they could retain them.
Absolutely. This
very
is
thought-provoking stuff.
Very thought-provoking. And I think there's something here about really proudly celebrating the value that women offer in the workplace, and also the legacy, the amazing legacies that they leave behind them as well. And that's what I really loved about your book, the way it brings that really front and centre and really celebrates that. And that's what we need more of, isn't it?
We definitely need more of that. I went to a beautiful awards ceremony of Advantages of Age with all these extraordinary women aged 70 and 80 in flamboyant gear. And I thought, that's what we need more.
Absolutely. And it was so interesting to have seen your post about that, because I'm half Chinese, and in Chinese culture, age is revered and celebrated. It's seen as a source of wisdom. And you know, if an older person, like, for example, my mother, tells anyone what to do, you need to do it, because it is seen as coming from a source of great value and strength. So it's very different to perhaps to Western society. In many ways.
It's a Western issue. Yeah, you're right.
What an amazing book. Thank you so much, Dr.
My total pleasure. Thank you for having me, Zoe and Paul.
It's our pleasure. We will put details of the book in the show notes. Where else can people find you?
They can mainly find me on LinkedIn under Dr. Lucy Ryan. They can find me on Instagram, and they can also check out my websites, which is Mindspring or lucyryan.co.uk.
Wonderful. We'll put those in the show notes. And what are you up to next?
Well, clearly it's not a long rest. So obviously I had one weekend and that was it. So there's some business as usual, training and coaching, but I've also joined forces with Noon, which is a brilliant organisation run by Eleanor Mills, and I'm doing some consulting work with them. And so we do a collaborative brilliant push on queenagers and their value to organisation. So I'm excited about that too. So there's lots going on now.
Amazing. Well, we can't wait to see what you do next, and keep in touch. And we would love to have you back again in the future, when no doubt you'll have achieved even more amazing things.
Thank you so much, Zoe. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you to Lucy for joining us on the podcast. A lot to think about in that conversation, and a wonderful way to close out these first 4 episodes.
As always, we really do appreciate that you've listened all the way through to the end of this episode, so thank you. You can support the podcast by leaving us a 5-star review wherever you listen to us. It really does help us to reach more people, so if you've enjoyed what you've heard, please do pass it on and share us with a friend.
Thank you so much for listening today, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks with a brand new episode of Starts at the Top.
See you then, and bye for now.